Hey there. Okay, it is November 6th. Donald Trump has been elected the 47th President of the United States. We're November 6th, 2024. You may remember that the first video I did for this channel was November 11th, 2016, much when I was in a similar mood where I wanted to talk about how the media had interacted with the electorate, what the narratives were, how they tried or failed or succeeded to shape what we were all thinking about during the election and how that played out during the election. And I am moved to do that a little bit now about the election of 2024. I want to talk about the things that were put to bed and the things that sort of are rising. We'll start with the stuff that's being put to bed. I think this election puts a pin in the idea that experts, quote unquote experts, are the last word that people are going to pay attention to on soft topics. And by that I mean no one believes that an expert economist has any idea what they're talking about when they're trying to tell us exactly what we have to think or feel about the economy. When a bunch of economists come together and, Nobel Prize winning economists get together and tell you, oh, the economy is doing great, but you know for a fact it's not because you can see your bank account. The left had spent an enormous amount of time telling you if you didn't believe the experts, but in fact you believed the world you were actually living in, that you were some sort of moronic rube and worthy only of their condescension. That's dead. We as a society have rejected the idea that these sort of soft topic experts are the definitive word of anything. I think it's pretty clear that the American people are more than willing to pay attention to an expert in a hard science, highly technical field. For instance, I don't think, the internet's the internet, and I'm sure I can find a YouTube video that disputes it, but there aren't many people who would be like, oh, that expert doesn't have any idea what the speed of light actually is, or that sort of thing. No, it's more when these people are psychiatrists or, environmental experts in some vague way, meaning they claim to have an expertise of the environment as a whole or whatever. Those sorts of fuzzy-ish sciences, I think it's pretty clear that we are over being told that we have to pay attention to these people, or we are just too stupid to make decisions for ourselves. So experts are dead. The idea that the mainstream media, that's CNN, MSNBC, ABC, Fox, these sorts of things can simply dictate what people think anymore is dead. It's done. Alternative media, which we will talk about soon, has taken on some of that mantle. But in the end, I don't think anybody at the moment claims to be able to define the narrative for the American people as a whole. I think it's too fluid right now, and it should be too fluid. Wow, that's messy back there. Anyway, forget about that. It should be fluid. Finding the truth of a situation should be a matter of listening to a lot of points of view, synthesizing all that information and deciding what it is you believe. We failed when we got very dependent on the idea that we could just turn on some trustworthy source and let them digest it into a soundbite or a small editorial, and that we could just go off and believe that, thinking that that was the last word of it. Even the people who long for the days of Walter Cronkite and Dan Rather, because they believe somehow that Walter Cronkite didn't have biases or wasn't shading the news, or that those organizations were objective, even that really just means that you didn't have an alternate source for any information. So there's no way to know how much bias they were introducing into the system because you had no counterpoint. So that idea of the mainstream media being able to define the narrative, that's dead. The idea that the government is capable of controlling the narrative on social media died. For a little while, it looked like they had control. They were forcing Facebook to take things down. During Twitter, they forced to take down. Like during COVID, the government was at its high watermark of manipulating the social media conversation so that no one questioned or could effectively question what the government was telling them. That's pretty much over with now. The idea that abortion is the single issue that drives the left or the American population, pro or con, that is done. it looks like we are going to wind up in a situation which I think was the compromise that everybody predicted from the beginning who was paying attention. It's going to be a states' right issue. Some states are going to be more restrictive, some states are going to be less. But on the whole, the American population seems comfortable with 12-week first trimester as the discretionary abortion period as a compromise that the sort of entire nation can at least live with. I think we're going to wind up getting there, but the idea that you can just scream abortion and suddenly, a massive wave of support will appear, that's dead. January 6th is dead as a political issue. You can believe what you want to believe about it. We will talk about it in a future time, whether it was a protest, whether it was a riot, whether it was an attempted overthrow of the government. I don't particularly care what you believe. And as it turns out, nobody else does either. The attempt to use January 6th as the last word in whether or not Donald J. Trump is fit to be president was completely repudiated. And that ties into the idea that the media can no longer single-handedly define how everybody looks at it. If you were to go with the CNN view that this was an attempted coup and that obviously Donald Trump was in charge and that this is an indication that he plans on being a dictator and never allowing another free election and yada, yada, yada. If you were to buy into that, this election wouldn't have been close. So obviously people no longer buy into whatever CNN tells them is what happened. They will review the event for themselves and they will draw their own conclusions and they will vote accordingly. So January 6th as a cornerstone issue that the left can beat on and sort of generate this wave of outrage, it's toast. The idea that the left wing owns the minority vote is dead. With it dies the idea that legal immigration driving demographic change is going to fundamentally shift the electorate to the left. That is dead as well. While obviously he didn't win in these populations, Donald Trump has continued to make historic inroads with Latino voters, with Black voters, with minorities of every description, including LGBTQ communities. In other words, Donald J. Trump has put down a roadmap for the Republican Party and how to increase their support among these populations. And it turns out the magic answer is just treat them as if they are citizens who care about the same things that most other citizens care about fundamentally. Free speech, the Constitution, the preservation of the nation, the economy, and the protection of free societies around the world. They care about these things just as much as they care about trans story hour in a library. So the idea that as the demographics shift, the left will fundamentally own the electorate forever. When we're talking about legal immigration, that died. So that was interesting. What else died? Identity politics as a driver of voting in general died. Kamala Harris, for good or ill, never managed to run on her record. Honestly, she didn't really have a record. But really, in the end, all the Democrats could say about Kamala Harris was, she's Black, she's a woman, she's not Donald Trump. And because of the particular lens through which the left currently sees the world, they are under the belief that all the women in the world will want to vote for her because she's a woman, and all the Blacks in the world will want to vote to her because she's Black. I mean, it's just natural. She looks just like them. And what could possibly be more important to someone than the idea of voting for someone who looks like them? At its core, there's this idea that gender and race define community, that it's the most salient point about a person, and that it defines your thinking or should define your political thinking. I think that's dead. More women than expected voted for Trump. Far more minorities than expected voted for Trump. And Donald J. Trump has laid out the roadmap for how the GOP can approach those minorities in the future. So that narrative is dead. And that's really interesting. So what is alive? In other words, what's moving in to take its place about how we deal with the world around us and the media if those things are gone? And the answer is alternative information sources And the idea of sorting through information to find your own truth is making a comeback. When Elon Musk bought Twitter, that was an incredibly important event. It broke the cycle of all the large social media companies instantly caving in every time the government issued them a request to take down some content. Not a legal request. In other words, it wasn't a subpoena. It didn't say that that content was illegal. But we went through some time during the COVID years when all the administration, the Biden administration, had to do was send a letter to Facebook and be like, hey, we're a little uncomfortable with that content. And Facebook and Twitter, they had these accelerated processes where they just had employees dedicated to taking this stuff down without ever questioning why. When Elon Musk bought X and put an end to that, we saw a resurgence of the ability to find information that ran counter to whatever the narrative that the mainstream media was pushing. And for good or ill, depending on your point of view, people are finding that to be incredibly valuable. So it turns out that some people, a significant number of people, like having access to multiple points of view about an event, to a lot of video about an event, to transcripts, to links to the source documentation, and that they will sort through all that and draw their own conclusions, and that they that they no longer really feel comfortable just waiting for some talking head to pre-digest the information. Granted, there's a huge number of people on both sides who just parrot whatever talking point their favorite personality tells them. But there's a growing segment that doesn't do that. And that's awesome. In fact, authenticity as a whole is on the rise. If you think about where the really impactful things have been happening in media lately, it's long-form, free-form discussion. Joe Rogan, the Jordan Peterson stuff, the conversations Dave Rubin is having, the on-campus conversations that have been taking place with some of the other organizations, the on-campus debates and whatever, where people will go somewhere for 2 or 3 hours and talk, or a Joe Rogan interview where Donald Trump will go and sit for 2 or 3 hours and talk. What you're seeing there is a sort of nascent or beginning reaction to try and come up with a way to break through pre-scripted, artificial, soundbite-driven content creation. The idea being that if someone can sit down and have a 3-hour conversation where they don't know what the questions are, where the conversation naturally evolves from place to place, where they have to demonstrate a depth of information across a wide range of topics, as well as be able to talk, show their personality the way you do on, say, an episode of Joe Rogan, respond to challenges, make your points, somewhere between a debate and a fireside chat, you find that it is very, very hard for someone to lie to you about who they are when that is going on. It's one of the reasons why Kamala Harris was never able to survive in that format. So authenticity is on the rise. And these sorts of formats, while they're imperfect and inefficient at it, are an attempt to break through pre-scripted, soundbite-driven communication and get to something realer. So that's really interesting. So that's on the rise. And in general, free discourse on social media is back on the rise. What else died? I think the idea of just being able to scream gun and make everybody fearful in the political sense is dead. I think the idea that you can just scream Nazi or racist at someone now, I think that's dead. The surprise rape accusation is toast. And we've seen it far too often that, 30 years ago without any proof, and I've never mentioned it till now until it was incredibly convenient for someone who's probably giving me a lot of money for a book, this guy did something horrible to me and now we expect the world to grind to a halt. I think that's pretty much done. As is the same thing in the legal sense. The idea that the sitting administration can simply manipulate the law to get someone to be declared a felon, and that's supposed to be a stop the presses moment where everybody shies away. And what you see as a through line in all this is a breakdown in trust, right? You only ignore that someone's been convicted of a felony if you have no faith that the court system was acting in a reasonable manner when they convicted them. You only ignore that someone's being accused of rape if you have no faith that the accusation is in earnest, or that any of the people making it are credible, or that any of the people championing it are credible. You only ignore experts when you have no reason to believe that those experts are being truthful. You only ignore the media when you have no reason to believe that the media is being truthful. You see the through line. People are struggling to find a way to get access to information they can trust or draw conclusions they can trust in a society that has lost their trust. The government institutions have lost their trust. Academia has lost their trust. The media has lost their trust. Politicians never really had their trust. And the legal system is losing the trust of the American people. So that's all really, really interesting. And we're going to talk about more of that in depth. But I want you to reflect over the election. Those of you who are still incredibly upset, you don't have to do it now, though I doubt you're watching this video. Really reflect on what you believed and didn't believe, regardless of which side of the aisle you were on. And ask yourself, did you go to core sources of information for that? Or did you just believe a meme or just see something you saw on social media or in the mainstream media? And if that drove your thinking. Anyway, we're going to talk more about this stuff anyway. I will say I am incredibly pleased that Donald Trump was elected. I fully expected the DNC, let me put it this way, I fully expected to go to sleep and find out that at 4 o'clock in the morning there had been a problem, that the voting had been that the counting had stopped somewhere, that all the Republican poll watchers were sent home, and that mysteriously the counting resumed, and a couple 100,000 votes were found in incredible places, and the swing states went for Kamala Harris. I will leave speculation on what I think happens during those events, whether it's nefarious or not, for a future video. And I have my thoughts on why that didn't happen this time, but I'm incredibly pleased that it didn't. And man, I am as surprised this time as I was the first time, but I am incredibly eager to see what happens now. We're going to do a video in the next day or two about what I think is going to be different about the way Donald Trump governs this time from the first time, what lessons I think he's learned, and what that means for his administration. Okay, we're already spent a lot of time on this, so I'm going to kill the video. I hope you come back and check it out another time, and thanks for paying attention.